breaking down every game, every day in Major League Baseball. This is the Baseball Betting Show. Here is your host, Greg Peterson.
And warmer for the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for the Baseball Betting Show with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. This is one of the shorter podcasts that you're going to get this year because we're going to keep it to two parts. I'm really not too much of a futures guy with baseball. You guys have been hearing it over the last few days. I've been previewing the upcoming season, some of the players, some of the teams that might have a little bit of value on them moving forward, but certainly I want to be keeping this a little bit more to game, and thank goodness we actually do have a game that returns on this Thursday, as in the final segment, I give you my picks and analysis for our lone game between the Phillies and the Mets as we touch them all, and in this case, we touch the only one that we've got, but we'll be talking here in the first segment with one of our good friends, Danny Vietti. He does such great work over at CBS Sports. We'll just gauge the landscape that we're getting in baseball right now, some of the teams that he's bullish/bearish on, and don't look now, but the trade deadline is about 2 or so weeks away, and it's going to be a very, very interesting deadline because there's very, very few teams that are truly out of it. You got a lot of teams that are going to be wondering whether or not they're going to be buying or if they're going to be selling at the deadline. So we're going to be chatting about that with him and so much more. And we'll take a look at just where we're getting in that NL East as well. I think that that's going to be the best race in all of baseball. So we're going to have a great time chatting with Danny, and then we'll get you guys the picks and analysis on our lone game. And then tomorrow, everything is back to normal. And if you ever do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larry ZM, name does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And per usual, I always do encourage you guys to send in whatever you'd like, especially when we have lesser slates like the one that we've got for this Thursday, but nothing is ever lesser when we're joined by this man, as we've got Danny Vietti aboard. He does such great work over at CBS Sports. Take a look at this great game that we all know and love of baseball. Additionally, I know he's doing an amazing job with the Wake and Rake podcast as well. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at Danny Vietti, first and last name, and with the Wake and Rake podcast, he does that with Will Middlebrooks. He was a part of the World Series team with the Red Sox, and on this podcast, always best known as being a former Milwaukee Brewer. And Danny, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Anytime, brother. Appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you, Danny. And Danny, we are currently at the All-Star break. Games finally gets back going on Thursday with one game, but better than no games. And just how do you take a look at the landscape of the league right now? Because I do feel like a few teams like the Dodgers and the Brewers have separated themselves from the rest, but and especially out there in that American League, it feels like it's one of the more open seasons that we've seen in quite some time outside of maybe your top 2, top 3.
Without a doubt. And these next few weeks as we approach the trade deadline could really dictate how the season is going to go, not just for the teams that fall out of it, but for the teams that are contending, because there are so many fringe teams hovering around that 500 mark. Starting in the American League, you can include the Twins at 48-49, Red Sox 46-48, Astros 47-51. The Orioles are around, the Blue Jays are around, the Detroit Tigers are around. That's not even including the wild card teams, include the Mariners, Guardians, and Yankees. On the National League side of things, Marlins, Phillies, Cubs in the National League wild card, but below them, Cardinals are 5 games over 500. Pirates are 3 games over 500. The Diamondbacks have crept up over 500, and then Padres and Nationals are hovering around that 500 mark. And what's most important about this isn't necessarily whether these teams will be contending, it's what these teams are going to do with players who could be put on the trade market. Padres could put Michael King up for to be available. That's a dominant starting pitcher that a lot of teams would love to have. Mason Miller, likewise, the most dominant reliever in baseball. Is he available? And you look over in the American League side of things. The Red Sox have about 4 or 5 different trade pieces that they would love to get rid of if they're out of contention, including Jarren Duran, Aroldis Chapman, Sonny Gray, Wilson Contreras. But if the Red Sox, who have won 9 out of their last 10 games, all of a sudden continue to streak a little bit, maybe the Twins fall back a little bit. Well, now Joe Ryan is available. Maybe the Astros fall back. Is Jeremy Pena available? So there's just so many question marks that are going to fortunately be answered very, very quickly, because the season is running out and it runs out rather quickly. And by the season, it's not necessarily the last game of the season. It's really the last game until the trade deadline.
Yep, exactly. And that's coming up in about 2 or so weeks as this comes out. So, man, there's going to be a lot to be decided there. And when it comes to some of those fringe teams, is there one or two that you're right now feeling bullish on? Because it just feels like the entire American League, as we alluded to. Like, as much as I love to dog the LA Angels, 2 good weeks puts them right back in the wild card on. Every single team out there is not quite dead yet. And I think that's one of the most interesting landscapes that you can find, especially with just how weak all those divisions are.
I can't say I'm bullish on any of the American League teams. Frankly, none of these teams outside of your division leaders, and even the division leaders aren't all that impressive, other than the Rays, really. There's just no one that's really earned that respect. The American League is just a hodgepodge of good teams, not great teams at this juncture. The National League, though, a couple teams that have been streaking of late and playing better baseball, and I think will continue to do so, starting with the Miami Marlins. I think this team is multifaceted in that they can produce runs in a number of different ways. Although they lack power a bit with that lineup, they do a really nice job of just setting the table with guys like Otto Lopez and Liam Hicks and Xavier Edwards, guys that don't necessarily hit the ball out of the yard, but they are able to produce runs by moving guys over, bunting with less than 2 outs or nobody out, runner on second base type situation. And then you put that together with a starting rotation that I hate to say underrated because it seems like Miami always has a good starting rotation. But you have Sandy Alcantara, who's won a Cy Young. You have Max Meyer, your former top pitching prospect and All-Star this year. You have Yuri Perez, who was top 5 coming in this season and Cy Young as a Cy Young favorite. So that rotation is legit. That offense is now hitting their stride at the right time. And in another team that maybe a lot of people maybe aren't looking at quite yet just because it's another small market team is Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh in that rotation with Skeens, Ashcraft, Keller, Bubba Chandler, I think they have yet to hit their stride. Now, Jared Jones had a terrific start against Philadelphia just before the All-Star break. If they can get 3 to 4 of these starting pitchers hitting their stride at the right time, all of a sudden you get Brandon Lau healthy again coming out of the All-Star break. That all of a sudden Pittsburgh, who is hovering at 500, I think you could see them kick it into gear a little bit. And I don't think they're going to be massive blockbuster trade front office at the deadline. That's just not what they do. But this rotation is a rotation you do not want to face come postseason time because you don't want to see Skeens, Keller, Jones, Chandler at their best in a 5-game series.
Yep, and for the Pirates, it's going to be a little bit more of a wild card hunt for them rather than taking a look at the division because the Milwaukee Brewers are there, as we've got Danny Vietti, who does such great work over at CBS Sports, joining me on the Baseball Betting Show. But I'm glad that you brought up the Marlins because I look at that NL East race, and I think that that might be the best race in all of baseball because the Braves, with all their injuries, they've got the worst record in baseball over the last 40 days. The Phillies, they've really been able to come on strong. And Zach Wheeler, you know that he's going to be very angry about the All-Star snub here in the second half of the season. And then you mentioned the Miami Marlins. Fortunately, we've got the Mets out there as well. That's been rough to say the least. But how do you take a look at a National League East where, heck, even the Washington Nationals aren't dead yet for a wild card spot?
I'll start with Philly and Atlanta. They're actually very similar. You look at, for example, home runs hit this year. Philadelphia is at 7. Atlanta is at 8 in the league. So offensively, they're very, very similar in that they're they have a lot of length to their lineup, especially when they are all healthy. They have a lot of veteran players who have a lot of playoff experience. For Philadelphia, Schwarber, Harper, Stott, Turner. Atlanta, yeah, Olsen, Riley, Acuna when healthy. 2 established rosters, especially offensively, but 2 rosters that is really lacking some starting pitching depth, particularly. Philadelphia, outside of Sanchez, Wheeler, and Luzardo, they're in deep need for a 4th or 5th starter. And come postseason time, ideally, you want to have a 4th starter at least part of the mix for if you get into a 7-game series. Atlanta's in an even more difficult situation starting pitching-wise. They've converted 2 of their former relievers, including Ronaldo Lopez and Grant Holmes. They both used to be bullpen arms. They've been forced back into the rotation, and they've done a nice job so far. But outside of Chris Sale, It's tough. They're having a hard time pitching deep in the ball games. They're having to rely on their bullpen arms more and more. You have 4 or 5 players, including Martin Perez, Schwellenbach, Strider, all on the injured list. And so this National League East division, I haven't even gotten to Washington. That's also Washington's, not their strong suit is starting pitching. They have an elite lineup. But you have 3 teams in that National League East that are hunting for playoff spots, but all of them are similar in that they're fantastic at driving in runs. They can all hit the ball out of the yard, but starting pitching depth, each of these teams lacks. So my point in saying all that is that a lot of these teams are similar, which means they're probably going to be looking and hunting for similar players at the deadline. You could see some of these teams go and hunt these players a little bit more just to block the other teams in their division from getting said player.
Yep, and I think that that's such an interesting element of it as well, because while all these teams want to be going out there and getting guys, it's a big thing for them to be able to just make sure that the other team is not getting them as well. So it's a little bit of a chess game with that regard as well, and it makes it interesting for some of these smaller market teams. Like typically the Milwaukee Brewers don't make big moves. They made one with the Astros, which I don't know if it's going to be massive, but if anyone could solve the riddles of Colton Gordon and Lance McCullers Jr., it's the Milwaukee Brewers, and they're the one team that I think is so interesting at the deadline because they're definitely going to be buyers, but how much they buy is a question mark because last time we truly saw them go all in, that was CC Sabathia about 2 decades ago, and this could be the year that they pull the trigger on a bigger move.
And the unfortunate thing for Milwaukee is now I'm wondering which of these starting pitchers are going to be available. Because I thought the 2 best fits for both Tarek Skubal and Joe Ryan, at least 2 of the best fits or one of the best fits would have been Milwaukee for each of those players. I think I can see Joe Ryan in a Milwaukee uniform today. I can even see Tarek Skubal in a Milwaukee uniform today, if I don't see him in a Dodger uniform, that is. But the problem is that the Tigers have all of a sudden found themselves back in the wild card race. They're just 3.5 games out. The Twins are tied for that final wild card spot. So it remains to be seen whether either of those 2 guys will be available. Milwaukee typically doesn't go after your superstar A-level names. So maybe it's a Seth Lugo. Maybe it's a Michael Wacha, who was an all-star this year. I think Milwaukee absolutely, Lance McCullers is not the answer. I don't think they're going to stop at Lance McCullers. At least they shouldn't. I expect them to be active. It just remains to be seen whether Milwaukee, how hungry are they going to be to pick up one of the larger names that could be available.
Yep, that's going to be a very interesting element of things because you know that they're going to do something at the deadline. We just don't know what they're going to be able to do, and they're one of the teams of intrigue right now. And just when you take a look at the league, there are teams that we're obviously bullish/bearish on. We talked about some of the teams that you're liking right now. Is there a team or two that right now you're having a little bit of fear? Maybe they got off to a nice first half of the season and they might fall back because we have seen some of these teams like the Cardinals, mentioned the Nationals, the White Sox, these young and hungry teams had really good first halves of the season. I do have a little bit of fear that with many of these guys not used to a 162 game season though, that there might be a fall up here in the second half.
I mentioned San Diego. San Diego has been slumping for a while. Machado's been hitting the ball better, at least over the last month of the season. He finally has that batting average up over the Mendoza line. His OPS has crept over 700. So he's hitting the ball better, but Tatis is really not hitting the ball with slug right now, even still. You have a starting rotation that is just duct taped together with outside of Michael King, got Griffin Canning, Herman Marquez, Walker Buehler, JP Sears, Giolito's on the IL, Musgrove's been on the IL all year, Pavetta's been on the IL all year, Randy Vasquez on the IL. So you have an organization that is undergoing an ownership change, and they also have a payroll that have $300+ million contracts to Machado, Tatis, Xander Bogaerts. They gave Joe Musgrove a big contract. Yu Darvish is still on the books. So this is a team that has disappointed thus far, and you wonder with this ownership change whether they're going to punt on contending this year in an effort to cut payroll and hopefully contend for 2027.
Yep, it is going to be interesting to see what we get there. And we've got a lot that's happening in this game right now, Danny. You've got your finger on the pulse of a little bit of all of it. You do such a great job with the podcast. You do such great work over at CBS Sports and so much more. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Appreciate you having me on, Greg. A lot of trade deadline content over these next couple weeks at Wake and Rake Pod on the social handles, Wake and Rake Podcast on your favorite audio platform.
Absolutely. And Danny is doing such an incredible job taking a look at all of this, and every single time he joins me with such great insight. So big thanks to Danny for joining me on the Baseball Betting Show, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis for, well, our one game on the betting board for this Thursday as we touch them all.
Breaking down every game, every day in Major League Baseball. This is the Baseball Betting Show. Here is your host, Greg Peterson.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for the Baseball Betting Show with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It was great to be joined by Danny Vietti today, who does such great work over at CBS Sports. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. He did so once again today. So big thanks to Danny for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis for, well, our lone game on the betting board for this Baseball Thursday as we touch them all.
If a game is listed on the betting board, Greg has a side and a total on it, so it is time to touch them all.
Do note that, as per usual, any changes are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at GN_D1. Really easy to go in Las Vegas rotation order when you've got one game. So let's dive in. This is 9:51, 9:52. The Phillies, they are going to be playing us the New York Mets. Christian Scott, great Scott, goes for the Mets. Aaron Nola hopes to be super for the Phillies. Phillies between -128 to -140 favorites, between +106 to +122 for the Mets. 9.5 is the total. We saw some 10s earlier, now it's 9.5. The over is -110 to a -120. Under is between even a -110 and set a total of an 8.8. I do like the under. Now for Aaron Nola, it's been a no good, very bad, terrible season for him, and the team is below 500 in his starts. I do think that there's a little bit of positivity doing on his 5.75 ERA because he does have a 4.67 fielding independent. He is getting 9.5 strikeouts per 9 innings, but he's really letting up the deep ball. 1.9 home runs allowed per 9 innings. He's always had a little bit of home run issue. It's been worse and worse and worse, and he is backed up by the lesser bullpen. For the Phillies, they are 21st in bullpen ERA. Meanwhile, for the New York Mets, they are currently 15th in the league in terms of bullpen ERA. Now, both bullpens are obviously going to be very rested. Yohan Duran or Ryan Kerkering, they're going to be good to go. For the Phillies, Chase Sjogert has been a little bit up and down. Tim Meza's been relatively okay, and you're probably going to need more of this bullpen than perhaps the Mets. Now, for the Mets, Christian Scott has the ability to knock himself out of a start very early because he's giving up about 4.1, 4.2 walks per 9 innings, but he is recording a 3.17 ERA, albeit it comes with a fielding dependent, more around a 4.10 because he has been able to get quite a few strikeouts. He is getting over 10 strikeouts per 9 innings. He's given up about 1.2 home runs per 9 innings, and be mindful that this is a Phillies team that has been much better with their offense when they've been at home rather than away from home. Right now for the Phillies, they're averaging in the neighborhood about 4.9 runs per game at home. That is a top 10 mark in all of baseball, more like 3.9 runs per game away from home, and that's actually second worst in the National League, with the worst being the New York Mets. They're averaging 3.8 runs per game away from home, so it's a big reason why I'm in on the over. Juan Soto has been able to give you 19 plus home runs. He's been able to give you a 400 on base. Outside there for the Mets, Carson Bench has been able to about a 260. Francisco Alvarez hasn't embarrassed himself at the plate, but Francisco Lindor has been awful this year. Brett Beatty has been awful. These mix and match guys in the outfield really aren't cutting it in. For the Phillies, we have seen the guys like Bryson Stott, Trey Turner, the struggling infielders, hit a little bit better, but it's still a very top-heavy team. You've got 3 nice mashers. Brandon Marsh is hitting a 300 with 15 home runs. Kyle Schwarber, 32 Schwarber bombs and a 370 on base, and he's going to strike out darn near 250 times this year. And then Bryce Harper, 365 on base. He's been able to supply 20 home runs as well, but Gabriel Raconis has not been the answer in the outfield, and when they've had Adolis Garcia out there, both of these guys have hit below the mid-dose line of 200. The catcher spot with JT Realmuto, Rafael Marchand, these guys have not been great to say the least. As well, and for the New York Mets, we have seen the bullpen start to toilet bowl a little bit with Austin Warren really having some issues, but the rest of the bullpen outside of Austin Warren, it's still been pretty steady Eddie. You've got these guys like Oscar Brisbane, AJ Minter, Brooks Raley, who have been able to give you a sub 325 ERA. Luke Weaver overall has been solid this year. I still have no faith whatsoever in Devin Williams, but I do think that Christian Scott is going to be able to give you the better start even though it's going to be warm out there in Philadelphia, I think that you get a lower scoring game. So I did set a total of an 8.8. I like the under. Personally, for myself, I did need at least a plus 116 to be able to take a shot on the Mets on the money line. I was able to find that. So I'm in on the Mets, and I'm going to be in on this total to the under as well. And that'll wrap things up for the Thursday edition of the Baseball Betting Show, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Danny Vietti, who does such great work over at CBS Sports. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Baseball Betting Show, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, maybe does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast throughout the season, whether we've got games or not. As you guys saw, I am with you, and tomorrow we get a full slate once again where I'll get you guys picks and analysis on every game every day. So I appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.